In 2018, we were traveling down the East Coast and we were hit by lightning in our boat. And we're at sea. We're 30 miles out to sea. It's a very calm night, but there's lightning all around us. And we take a direct hit to our mast. And the boat literally lit up and went into a suspended state.
You are and will always be your most valuable asset. Welcome to the Me Inc. podcast, a series of conversations with individuals living happy, healthy, and engaged lives, while exploring the importance of emotional intelligence to thrive in this ever-changing world. My name is Nigel Franklin, a CPA, MBA, and a certified emotional intelligence coach. My mission and passion is to enable others to be that best version of themselves by understanding the importance of making investments in their physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. Let's start the show. Have you ever wondered what it's like to completely transform your life? To go from a stay-at-home mom to a successful entrepreneur, trading a 4,000 square foot house for a 240 square foot boat. Join me as I welcome Deborah Marlor, the CEO of Simplicity Life and Leadership Coaching, who has done just that and more. Deborah's journey is one of adventure, resilience, and transformation. I promise her story will inspire you to set sail into uncharted waters of your own life. Listen in as she shares her wisdom, reflections, and advice to her younger self, reminding us that it's never too late to embrace change and make a meaningful impact on others. Again, prepare to be inspired and set sail on your own remarkable journey. The backstory on how I met Deborah. I was in Grenada for my uncle's funeral in April this year. And while I was there, I had this really peaceful thing wash over me. I'm going to call it a thing. I'm not sure what it was, but I stayed on the same spot on the beach for most of my trip there. And on one night, I watched this couple going out to do a shore dive, and I was like, that's pretty cool. But the next day, I had planned on diving for the first time in 5 or 6 years. And on the boat was Deb and her husband, Hugh. So we started talking, asked about the dive the night before, shared I saw them go out, and then just traded information on who we were and what it is that we're doing. And that dovetailed into a 2-hour conversation with Deb shortly after diving together. And I was so inspired by the story that I thought that it was only fitting to share it on the podcast. So here we are today. Thank you for agreeing to share your story today. I'm excited. And where we always start, share with the audience a little bit about who Deborah is.
I grew up in Erie, Pennsylvania, and the soonest that I could leave Erie, I did. Adventure has always been. I was the one who crossed the Mississippi River. I feel like I was in a covered wagon. I'm honestly not that old, but my mom sure felt that I had gone west and left the planet. And I went to San Francisco. And when I was in San Francisco, I began my transformational studies. This was in the late 70s, before many of your listeners may have been born. And so here we are today. I have lived a life that's incredibly full. I've lived all over the United States. I have traveled all over the United States. And one of my passions is sailing. And I learned to sail on Lake Erie when I was in my teens, and I raced. And I took that with me to San Francisco, and I raced in San Francisco. The ocean and water, beaches, sun have always called to me. And I found myself working in transformation for a couple of years. And then I went to technology, and I spent the rest of my career in technology until 2019. I retired in 2016 when I sold my company. I had a sales and marketing company that served technology companies throughout the world. And we did lead generation in the tune of about $30 to $45 million per quarter of net new leads for our clients. And from there, we moved on the boat and went, quote unquote, sailing.
You went sailing.
We decided that we would do a passage from Houston, which was where we were living at the time. I sold my company in Austin, Texas. I lived in Boise, Idaho for 21 years, a landlocked state, which seems so contrary to who I am because I love the ocean, but I also love the mountains. So moving forward, Hugh and I left Houston after having moved the boat from the Pacific to the Gulf. And our intention was to do as much sailing as we possibly could. He was still working in IT and I was quote unquote retired, and I failed at retirement. I only was retired for 6 weeks.
Okay.
I took a contract position with offshore sailing school and was able to transform their telecommunications and their CRM, and spent 17 months working with them. And I was with them. One of Steve Colgate's goals for me was to make sure that he had a phone system that even in a hurricane wouldn't miss a call. We didn't miss an email. We didn't miss a call because I was truly tested by Irma. And that certainly was a big deal. It was a big
tested by Irma. So that's Hurricane Irma. And where did you experience Hurricane Irma? Where were you at that time?
We were in Legacy Marina in Fort Myers. Mm-hmm. The boat was prepared for hurricane, which means that we took everything off of her, stripped her down so that she was just a basic boat with nothing, no sails, no canopy, nothing. And she had fenders on either side so that if she was rubbing up against something, that she would be okay. And we were in a hotel. We were very lucky that the storm hit further south as far as the wall and the eye and all of that and where the major damage was. But when we came back to our boat 48 hours later, our home was still floating and was in perfect condition.
Okay. So you go from Houston to Fort Myers, Florida. So how did you find your way to the Caribbean? And what's the process of going from a 4,000 square foot house to living your dream on a boat that's 240 square feet? Now, that's a mental shift, or a mindset shift, a way of life shift. That is a huge leap to take.
In 2018, we were traveling down the East Coast and we were hit by lightning in our boat.
Right.
And we're at sea. We're 30 miles out to sea and it's a very calm night, but there's lightning all around us and we take a direct hit to our mast and the boat literally lit up and went into a suspended state. People in science say that's not an uncommon thing to happen. And it was very weird to me because everything was white and gold. And I was pretty sure that after the sound that I had heard that I was dead and that I was going to heaven, which I was lucky. I felt good. I'm going to heaven. And very shortly after that, everything went black and the alarms came on. And so my husband and I began the process of really having to determine what our seaworthiness was and how we were going to manage through this situation, because what we began to discover is that anything electronic was basically gone. We also was a fire in our engine. And so our engine, the fuel pump actually was fried by the lightning as it exited and went out the propeller shaft. And we had no engine. So yes, we're a sailboat. And that at the moment in time that the lightning hit us, there was no wind. So with a sailboat, unless you have wind, you can't go anywhere unless you have your engine on. And we have no engine. And then what's extraordinary is that we were calling what's called Boat US in the United States. It's one of the salvage companies or towing companies. And we were calling them we had a handheld VHF radio that was off in a cupboard and it was charged with proper batteries. And so we pulled it out and it worked. And so we could place a distress call, and it's called a pon-pon, to the U.S. Coast Guard, asking them to relay to our Boat US, could they come and get us and tow us? And the Coast Guard made the decision to come get us. What we didn't know at the time was that there was also a front coming. And by the time the Coast Guard got to us, we were in 15-foot waves and it was raining cats and dogs. And add another 6 hours to that night. So they got there at about 4:00 in the morning. And we arrived in Charleston, and then they handed us off to Towboat US, who put us in our slip for the next 14 days. And we got to figure out what we were going to do with our home.
So I'm smiling because there's just so much that my mind it is just not going to wrap itself around easily without hearing a little bit more about it. So you get struck by lightning, but what you said was that it was flat that day. So you're saying that it was like the calm before the storm?
Yeah, exactly. It was like a beautiful pond. It was just flat, docile. You just kind of looked at it. Wow, this is just so weird. And all you could hear was the engine because we were just moving along with under engine. We couldn't sail. There truly was no wind. And as that night moved forward, you could see the front coming. You could actually see the darkness of the clouds and the wind kicked up. The sea, magical and mystical place. And it very quickly can become treacherous. And we experienced that.
The one constant that the universe offers us is change. You go from calm to being hit by lightning to then almost, yay, I have communication that I can reach someone to get help. And then the storm starts.
Yeah.
And then you're now going from calm to 15-foot waves. What's the mindset? What's going on in your head? And how are you prepared to handle something like that? Because in my head, you're in a new space. You're now living on the boat, your new home, but you're having all these things happen that are just, I don't know. What is the chances of being hit by lightning while boating? Do you know what that is?
It's rare. I'll tell you what, we would say, in fact, that night we said to my brother-in-law who was with us, he asked that question. And my husband said, "Oh, Jim, it's rare. It's 1 in a million." And so we call him Sparky just because he brought it up. And it's be careful what you ask for, right? Because you will get it one way or another. I laugh when I say that because there was a conversation that as we were going north into New York and we were looking at our old instruments, I said to my husband, boy, I sure would love to have new electronics. I'd love to have a new chart plotter. And we had an old Furuno radar system and Raymarine that was pretty dated. And be careful what you ask for because you don't know how you're going to get the result that you want. But we got it $60,000 later. But yeah, we got there.
So I just asked chat, it didn't give what are the odds for a boat being struck by lightning on a boat. But what it did say was that our chances of being hit by lightning just as an individual is about 1 in 1.3 million. So that's the chances of it are slim.
Yes.
But back to the mindset. How are you managing you through such highs and lows?
Knew that there was never an option for me that to get upset, to get scared. It was all about keeping my passenger and my husband and myself safe. I think that what kicks in is reality. And reality at that moment was making sure that the boat was seaworthy and that we were not going from, there are 3 states of emergency when you're on a boat. And the middle one is where we were floating. We just didn't have power. When the wind happened, when the wind came up, we did have wind and we were reefed, but because of the amount of wind and the direction of the wind, we couldn't go the direction we wanted. And limping along, you have to consider all of the scenarios. So you begin thinking of the scenarios of what if. And so the first thing that we did is we went into a process where we were looking at every through hole in the boat and looking to make sure that we weren't taking on water. So it's this consistent, regular going in and checking that every 30 minutes that we had no changes. And the first big change that we had was when we noticed smoke in our salon and we had a fire in the engine, and that was the alternator. And my husband was able to distinguish the fire. And so that was a little bit of more excitement on top of the lightning strike. And so we basically get the smoke out of the cabin. We were diligent and supportive of each other, of just staying true to the focus on getting our goal when we go from point A to point B when we're sailing is to get there safely.
Right.
Right. Period. It's there no matter what, is to get there safely. And so that was the objective, to get there safely. And we went through, and my brother-in-law had nothing to contribute because he didn't know how to sail. And so he held a flashlight. So he really did contribute because he held a flashlight until we found out that there was one little bulb up in the spreader that actually would turn on and would light up the sail when we had it out before the Coast Guard got to us.
That sounds so much easier said than done. But
Yeah.
that's amazing. And I'm sure that there's something that's preparing you for that mindset or that space to do. So I want to jump back from it just a little bit back about who Deb is, and then we'll jump forward to see where do you go from being hit with lightning. So give me a little bit about Deborah growing up and what's formative about you and how you were walking through the world, or what was the basis of how you chose to walk through the world?
Nigel, the thing that was so great was as I grew up, my father died when I was 8. My mom had a very interesting life. She was abandoned after her mother died at 14. So her answer to everything was no, you can't do that. You cannot do that. And my immediate reaction was, why not? I lived in Harbor Creek in Erie, Pennsylvania. And then when I went west and finally met my husband in 1987 at a $2 blackjack table.
Okay. How does he feel about you sharing that story?
He loves it. And I was rude. I'd probably had one too many glasses of wine or whatever libation that you get in Las Vegas. And I was there for Comdex. So a long time, 87. And fast forward, he moves to Atlanta, Georgia. So I said, I've lived all over the country. And I, at that point, was working for a large software company in Atlanta, Georgia. We get married. And then 2 years later, we move to Washington, D.C. And I had a life experience in Washington, D.C., where I had an anaphylactic reaction to ibuprofen. And I almost died. I spent 10 days in ICU. And I looked at my husband and I said, I don't want to live in Washington, D.C. To me, it's dark. I don't like to turn the TV on. It doesn't bring me joy. And I said, there's got to be some kind of book. And there was a Rand McNally, the 50 greatest places to raise a family. So we had 2 girls, both in diapers, basically. And we landed on Boise, Idaho, Denver, Colorado, and Dallas, Texas. And we got all of the stuff from the chambers of commerce. But what was interesting is we kept being drawn to Boise. Ends up getting a job at Hewlett-Packard in Boise, Idaho. And off we go. And we have our 2 girls. And at that time, I was a full-time mom. And moving from corporate America and managing people and having sales goals and loving what I was doing to being a full-time mom, having had our second child and discovering that she had cognitive disabilities. And I took a big breath and began to see that being a mom was probably going to be one of the hardest things I ever did. And I can say to you today that being a mom in those formative years of my girls was one of the hardest things that I ever did. It was a lot easier running a business of 60 people, which I then did in Boise.
Oh, wow. Wait, we're touching on so many interesting things. You go from corporate America, housewife, to dealing with the challenges of having a cognitively challenged child.
Yep.
Help bridge that gap for someone's listening. Yeah. And as you go through that, what's happening mentally after your health issues? You are seeking joy. So help me bridge those gaps. Housewife
Sure.
to 60-person company.
When we were in Washington, D.C., where I got sick, Hugh had written a piece of software, and that software was something that we sold. I packaged it and I sold it. And so being a housewife, I would take the girls with me to Office Depot, and I would be putting together manuals and floppy disks and all this stuff, putting packages together to send to these people that bought this product. And we took that product to end of life. And I looked at Hugh, and he had become part of a community at Hewlett-Packard. And my life was pretty lonely at the time. I wasn't working. I was the chauffeur. The girls were starting to be in preschool, and I was mom. And I found I struggled with finding, I'm going to say this, and I have to be careful how I say it, but I was struggling with my value of contribution to the family. I knew that being at home and being with the girls made a huge difference. And I knew that what I had learned over the years was that bringing home a paycheck and working, I got a great deal of, I had a great time working. I enjoyed working. And what wasn't always fun for me was dirty diapers and getting thrown up on, but there was also joy teaching the kids how to make snowmen when they got a little bit bigger and go sled riding and ice skating, and all that stuff was really fun, and snow skiing. And so we're a very active family. And from there, I went to work for a hardware company that was a spinoff of Hewlett-Packard. And I started as a salesperson, took a territory, and I was supposed to travel at most 25% of the time. And for the 2.5 years that I was their number one salesperson, and I was traveling 75% of my time. And so Hugh and I had to manage that. And he kept saying to me, why don't you start your own business? You understand certain things, and why don't you do that? And I finally had an opportunity where I met a company, and I started talking with them, sent them my resume and said, I would love to work with you and help you with your product. Would you be interested? And they said, we would be honored. And they hired me, and I worked with them for 6 months. And then I got hired as a contractor to Sun Microsystems, and I managed 6,000 developers. There were 6,000 developers at the time at Sun, and I managed the co-marketing programs office, facilitating whatever the needs were that those 6,000 developer partners had.
Oh, wow.
And I turned that into a revenue center of $2 million for Sun annually.
When did you go on your own journey?
When I left Extended Systems, I started my own contract business.
Okay.
And so I was independent contractor doing the do myself. When I went to Sun, it was me. And then I hired Meg, who was an at-home mom of a guy that I knew at Extended Systems. And then I hired X, Y, and Z. And so we went from one house to the next house. I had 12 people in a house that we had, our big house that we built. We had 12 people working in the house for the first 2.5 years that we lived there.
Oh, wow.
And then we went into office space. And then I built a 6,500 square foot building, which is where we were serving Symantec, Hewlett-Packard, IBM, Voltage Security, and BEA, and the Harvard Business Review, and just Siemens Enterprise Communications, and Intel. And a lot of these companies aren't even around anymore because they've been bought up. And it's
How do you go from being at home, not enjoying changing diapers, questioning your value, to making such a big leap to now running your own company, growing it to 60 people? How do you unpack that for some young mom who might be in that same space, or some young guy who is setting out to do that? For a long time, I've wanted to be a house husband, so you never know. Maybe that would be my thing.
Yeah. My husband at one point was unemployed, and he was a house husband, and he loved it. And so he would come to, and it was just a short time, but what I was saying is that I was when I got the position in sales, I was working in an all male, pretty much all male company. One other woman and I were in sales. They had realized that hiring engineers and putting them into sales to pay your dues wasn't producing the results that they wanted. And so they wanted salespeople. And I took that position, and I was basically told that because I wasn't an engineer, that I would probably fail. And that to me is just, you just turned my engine on, and I had something to prove. And actually the real reason was because I didn't have a college degree. And so not having a college degree had never stopped me from being a successful salesperson. And my sales career had really begun by relationships. And I was very good at it. And I took a territory of Rocky Mountain West and Texas and turned it into the number one territory. So all of a sudden, I was beginning to see contribution again and things that I was good at, and that were things that were familiar to me. And the girls had gotten to a point where they were, obviously they still needed, we ate dinner every night together that I was home. But when dad was there and I wasn't, they always had dinner now at the kitchen table. The gap is really the motivation of having a drive to do something greater that can contribute in a way that makes a difference. I only would sell products that I could understand and I could see the value that they provided to the companies that bought them. I would not sell a product that I couldn't wrap my head around, or that I couldn't see the value that it made to an organization. So I had a litmus test that I would give myself for the kind of products that I would sell and people that I would represent.
I like the soundbite of motivation as being a drive to do something greater in the most simply stated way. How are you managing you through this experience? How are you taking care of you through this experience?
Probably didn't very well. Probably one of the things that I learned, and that I've learned probably in the last 3 to 5 years after having become a life coach, that I was doing what was needed. I was doing what was required of me. There were a couple of times that Hugh put me on a plane and sent me to Hawaii. And I went a whole week, 7 days without talking to another soul. And I was on the beach every day, and I was just being with the ocean. Again, here I am living on the ocean, but it was part of who I have been for a very long time. Right. And that calmed me, and that would give me what I needed to go that next bit. And so that was how it happened.
So you found peace in the ocean. I'm still very afraid of the ocean, Deb, so you should know that. The interesting thing, though, is that as you're talking about this, as you're finding value again, there has to be a foundation for you to do all these things. So looking back, is there that through line or something that is that thing that's motivating you or pushing you forward? You talked about mom, and mom always saying, no, maybe that's not the right environment for someone who wants to see more of the world. But what's those other things? What's happening along the way that makes you want to keep going forward? Because it's easy to give up.
I found ways. And even in high school, in 10th grade, I went to the principal and had the idea that women should be able to play sports, just like guys, that it should not exclude women. And I wasn't talking about women playing on the guys' teams. What I was talking about was women should have their own sports events that we can play and we can be challenged with. And so he gave me $200. I asked for $200 and he gave it to me to bring together the Tri-County PE teachers with the goal of creating basketball, softball, track, and volleyball for women in the Tri-County. the first year that we did that was my junior year and then my senior year. And then I was pre-Title IX. That was the beginning of women's sports before Title IX. And I don't even remember what year Title IX was, but I was before it. And so there's always been something in me that could see where something was needed and always went to fill the gap. And so for women, even when I started my company, I didn't want to go out and hire an HR person. And that I went to the church that we were going to, and I was involved with a couple of social groups, and I'm talking to women and I'm like, what do you think about coming back to work? Well, I'd love that, but I don't know what I could do. And then I'd talk to them and what were you good at before? And that was how I started my company, was hiring women and bringing women who had successful careers and help them regain their value that they saw for themselves and their contribution. And now all of a sudden they're bringing home paychecks and they're earning commissions and they're doing things that they didn't think was possible. And that was, I guess that's part of who I am.
So Title IX was in 1972. I think that's when it
I graduated I graduated in 73, but we didn't have title. No, nothing was done in my school in 72 and 73.
Wow. What, any other inflection points along the way? So you're seeing an opportunity in helping others to see their value again. And then you're going out and giving them the opportunity. That's actually pretty differentiated. Are there other things where you've actually gone out and done that same thing as you've made it along the way? So again, I'm taking that note of seeing an opportunity or seeing that there's a need and going out and filling that gap. And again, I'm taking that soundbite and I'm chewing on it. But how else has that shown up for you in life?
Sure. Yeah. When I was in Boise and I had built my company I started my company in 97. So in early 2001, 2, 3, somewhere around then, I was approached to be on the board of directors of the Women's Business Center. So the Small Business Administration has always had what in various states, women's business centers that will support women who are entrepreneurial. And so I was not only asked to be on the board, but I served as the president of the board for 7 years. And this was really finding opportunities for women and that women didn't have to be different than men, that they were are smart, and that we can create amazing companies and take care of people and in amazing environments where people want to work for us, and really just giving them tools to be successful. The other thing that I found myself doing early on with my company is that I had my company certified as a woman-owned business. So I went through the National Association of Women Business Owners and an organization called ASTRA to go ahead and go through a very rigorous vetting program to ascertain if I truly was a person running that company and that I didn't have some guy coming in when I chose to come in, that he was acting as the owner of the company. And so they spent days with me, vetting me to ensure that I was truly a woman-owned business. And again, I worked with that organization for years. And as I continued to build my company and just do the work, I loved what we did. I loved the value that we provided to the companies that we worked for, the relationships that I was able to create with the clients. I always remained, with the exception of I hired one salesperson. I did all the business development because I loved it. And so I ran the company and built and worked with a lot of young people and building training program for young managers And so seeing where I could and used people that had great skills. So I had an executive, actually, I worked with transformational coach and I worked with an executive coach, and both of them at the same time. And they supported me in nurturing me
Right.
during that period of time.
I like the ideas that you're putting forward, but one of the things I'm often conscious about is that whenever we tell our stories, or whenever we hear stories of success and people who we are inspired by, we rarely ever talk about maybe the chances or the times when they fell down. So looking back, what was, and I don't want to say some of the mistakes that you made, but what's one of the mistakes that you made that looking back on now that you would say, I would caution someone against it? And I didn't take care of myself well as one of them in that same space of self-care. I think that's one. So we're not going to use that one. But what is one of the mistakes that you've made looking back, and how did you back or learn from it?
So one of the things that I have always been able to do is learn from my failures. I've always been able to use the failure as the impetus for there is another way. If it didn't work that way, if I believed that there was a way, there would be. And I guess when I think about, is it Ford who said, or Edison, one of the two of them, if you think you can, you will. If you think you won't, you won't. So that whole time in business, we didn't always hit it out of the ballpark 100% of the time, but 95% of the time we did. And what we always did is, instead of making when something showed up as broken, or how can we fix it and make it better? There were a couple of companies that I worked for where I would say that I did it because I wanted to make the paycheck and I didn't really buy off on. So when I crossed the line of what I said to you earlier about, I had to be able to sell that product and understand it and see the value proposition that it made in the world to be able to really own it. If I didn't do that, then I failed in a certain way. But that gave me a realization that I needed to stay true to my core value and hold the center line on my core value, because that really was what drove me.
No, I like that. I really like that one. And I was smiling and caught a little bit because I was using last month, or actually a month and a half ago, I did a talk about that positive mental state, that mindset point that you'd have. And I used the quote, if you think you can or you think you can't, either way, you're right. And it's something that I think I posted it to my Instagram a little while ago. And the synchronicity of life, sometimes it just pulls me and catches me in a really positive way. So it was a Henry Ford quote, and it's something that I've leaned on quite a bit in the recent past. So thanks for sharing that. So I want to go back then to the being hit by lightning and then being suspended, thinking you're on the way to heaven. What happens after such a pivotal moment in life? I can't imagine it. I think I've had some big shifts, but what's on the other side of that?
There was a good deal of wine drinking to start. And then that all calmed down. And there's a bit of disbelief. It became evident that really, if this was our time, it would have been then, right? I have said for a very long time that I have lived an amazing life. I have done amazing things in my life. And sure, there are always things to go do and more dreams to create and all of that, but I've lived a good life. And so if God decided at that moment when we were struck by lightning, and I'm thinking, because of this Presbyterian upbringing that I had, that I was standing at the gates of heaven, right? And Those are the thoughts that were coming through my head. And then all of a sudden, everything goes black and goes silent. You manage through that. You get yourself to shore. You fast forward. You get the boat fixed. And life begins to happen again. Circumstances, conditions, and limitations of all sorts line up. The universe continues to give us whatever it is that we need along our journey. And so for me, that moment in time awakened in me that I was not living my purpose, that I was doing some consulting. I was doing this and that. I was having a grand time on the boat, socializing, but I wasn't contributing in a way that I think is intrinsic in me. What I thought was really quite unique was as I evolved through that period of time, of course, I'm on my computer a lot. And all of a sudden on Facebook, I'd been posting about what had occurred. And here pops up on Facebook, Mary Morrissey and her coach certification program. It probably 15, 20 times kept popping up. And I finally listened to her. And then I put it away. She pops up again. And I really think it's really quite serendipitous how things happen in the world. And the next thing I know, I'm listening to a 45-minute video of Mary talking about her certification, about her life, about who she is and her transformational studies. And I knew that what was next for me was to become a life mastery consultant. And so I put myself into hundreds of hours of study in a short time. I was in Key West. I would go to the captain's lounge every day with my computer, and I would do class after class, beginning to go through the programs that Life Master, or the Brave Thinking Institute now, they've evolved their name from the Life Mastery Institute to Brave Thinking Institute. And I am high level coach. I've been with them since 2019, March of 2019, as a certified life mastery consultant.
So what are you learning from that? What are those shifts that you're making as you're learning to be a coach in this same new space? And if you don't mind, what you're learning, and then how do you want to show up then? What is the framework that you're using as you create Deb's approach to this life coaching experience?
So first of all, what am I learning every day? Every day. I have learned the value of affirmations. I have learned the importance of the transcendentals and the thinking of how we think as human beings, and noticing that I didn't even know when I was younger that I was a dream builder. I was somebody who thought something and created it. And other people would say, you're an entrepreneur. I was that too. So I believe that most entrepreneurs are dream builders. They have a vision. So instead of making decisions based on my conditions, my circumstances, my situations, and the things that are around me, I make my decisions based on what's possible.
Oh, wow.
I have many paradigms that are within me that came with me from my upbringing in Erie, Pennsylvania, and being told, no, I can't. And so there was also, Debbie, that money doesn't grow on trees. You're right, Mom, money doesn't grow on trees. So there was always that scarcity that you couldn't do, you couldn't have. And I'm like, why not? Why is it not okay for a young woman to have a successful business and be generative and give back? I love being able to, even here on my little boat, to go through my closets and my lockers and take the things that I don't wear and put together a packet and take it to the church and give it away. I love being able to meet people here in the Caribbean, I just love being here. And it's just so embracing. But to be this person that walks in the door and that is smiling and that is endeavoring to live life in the fullest way possible. I know that when Mary Morrissey said to me, I was at a Dream Builder Live event in Arlington, Virginia, and I swear Mary was speaking to me, and there were 1,200 people in the audience, but I thought she was speaking to me because she said, what I heard was, Deb Marlor, what are you doing to be a greater, freer, fuller expression of you? That question had to be answered. And I began to really think about that. What can I do? What can I do from where I am with what I have? And one of the things that I made a decision to do was, first of all, when I started coaching, I stopped drinking because I knew that I needed to be a clear and completely available vessel from spirit to be able to support my clients. That the universe and God, infinite, speaks to us in very unique and wonderful ways, and that I needed to be available to hear whatever was being spoken to me as I coached. I know that I have learned the importance of living in gratitude for all of the things that I do have. The moment, and Mary has taught this to me, and I really will say that in the last year, this has been very impactful for me, where that moment when you wake up in the morning, when you're going from that deep sleep state to, I'm breathing today. And the first thought that comes into my head is, I am so happy and grateful that I was given this breath of life today. And with that breath of life, that then I get out my notebook and I write the things that I'm grateful for and who I'm going to be today. So I begin my day and my practice by defining who I'm going to be. Now, I wasn't always this woman. I have become this woman. My dream in 2017 was to bring my boat to the Caribbean and sail our boat here. And I didn't know what it was going to really take. I knew it was 1,253 miles. I knew that there were a whole bunch of countries. But what I learned was something new every day. I learned about weather. I'm a good sailor. And so I'm a safe sailor. I know that the structure of that, but I learned every day there was something more and new to learn. So I was growing. I feel like this lifestyle has given me the opportunity to be my green growing edge, and that I can, for anyone who has a dream of something or has the dream of living on the ocean in some way or form, that of course it's possible. And I coach people in that way.
Oh, wow. That's actually really good. So many things to unpack, but I think I'm always afraid if you start talking and then you don't want to stop talking. And I keep going and going. But I appreciate the possibility mindset, embracing an abundance mindset, and then the green growing edge of learning. I think those are the things that were actually coming to me. It's a good way to segue into the last part of the podcast where we talk about the emotional intelligence. It's amazing for me when coaches or people who are accomplished would be open enough to want to take something new that's different, and assessments that's new, that's different, and open. I am always inspired by that. So what did you learn? What did you take away from that EQI assessment? And I remember I smiled when we talked about it, because in my head, you saying that, oh, that seems to be me and it seems factual. And then you sat with an openness to hear what my analysis would be. I'm grateful for that opportunity. But What would you share with the audience? What did you learn? What did you take away?
I think, first of all, I want to stress how important it is to take the attention off of me I did that evaluation, and I always love to self-assess. So my question for myself is, where can I grow? What can I do to be that, that question? What can I do to be a greater, freer, fuller expression of me? And so for me in the assessment, the first thing that struck me, and I wanted to ask you this and I didn't, was, did I do a good job? Right?
I'm smiling because that's one of the first things that we do, is that we use it as a scorecard rather than just a data point. But you did a good job. How's that? And you showed up.
Yeah,
You
I did. Did I
participated.
pass?
You showed up. You participated. Not participated. That's a very flippant way of saying it. But you did take the assessment, and that's the biggest part of it. You're open enough to learn something new.
Yeah.
And that's the passing grade.
I don't see myself as being arrogant. And I know that the chance meeting that you and I had, where we started talking on the scuba trip, here we are out on the ocean going scuba diving. You're going one trip and I'm doing another one with two different master divers. And then you and I come back together and we start talking, and then we meet again. And we did that by choice, that there was something that we both felt. I knew that by meeting you, Nigel, that there was something, that the relationship that I now had with you is something special, and that I could learn from you. I always used testing in my business. So to find the attributes that, and remember when I said that I had a young management team and we brought emotional IQ into my company and began to have people assess their emotional IQ back in 13 and 14. So when we were doing those, and I sold the company in 2016. So that was it wasn't early stages of that, but it was something that I did in Boise. I know that I think that the most unique thing is that it assesses where you are now in this moment, in this present time. And I like having that be assessed, and that there's always opportunity to grow.
As we wrap up, what advice would you give your younger self? Like, looking back with these different places that you've gone to in life and where you've arrived to now, what advice would you give your younger self to help you accelerate that journey?
When you have the idea, follow it. When there is something that you are truly passionate about, and when I coach, we go through a 5-step question of, is your dream big enough to actually qualify as a dream? Because in dream building, you go, well, that's just a goal. No, it has to have good in it for others. It has to require assistance from a higher power. And there are 3 other questions that we answer. However, when you know that it's your purpose and it's something that you know that you were meant to do it. I have a 56-year-old client who knew that her purpose in life was to be a doctor. And she was an RN. Then she went to school to become a lawyer, and she practiced medical law in Canada. And today she is doing her surgical rotation in Atlanta, Georgia. So here she is 3 years later, after COVID, doing all of this work online, and she's beginning her surgical rotations.
How do you find your purpose? I'm sure that probably grabs someone's heartstring. Is there a Cliff's Note version of how do you find your purpose? How do you know that's your purpose?
Listen, it's that you got to listen. You've got to pay attention. And 2 weeks ago, I was in a class. I was in an immersion, And one of the great exercises that we did is we took and we divided our however old age, what our age is, into thirds. And we wrote down what were the things in our career? It was a vocational thing. And so in my first third of my life, what were all the jobs that I did and the things that I did? And what kept coming up? And then as I created my companies and did the things that I've done, all of the things that made me who I am, who I've become, all had to do about where I am today in coaching. That I have always had this purpose. I went down multiple roads to get where I am, but finally here I am. And I love what I get to do. What a gift to be able to be with people and watch them blossom and just get past the things that have stopped them in life and holding for them that they can. I love that.
And I think that's an amazing place to end the conversation. Deb, thank you so much for this. I'm inspired and I'm excited to share this with the listeners of the podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
What stayed with me from this episode, and it was a lot. I was smiling. I was inspired. I was trying to put myself in Deb's shoes and just being hit by lightning, and I couldn't see it. But those key points that are saying with me is that in adversity, I have the choice to not be upset, to not be afraid, and I can choose the course of action that would give me the best outcomes to the goals in those moments. Also, where am I growing? What am I doing to be the fullest, greatest expression of myself? What am I doing from where I am with what I have to keep moving towards my goal? The importance of living with gratitude. I am so happy to be able to make the daily choice of who I will be on that green growing edge, because that's where all my dreams are possible. I appreciate you listening to this episode. If you find value in what you've heard today, please like and share, and don't hesitate to reach out to me if there's anything that I can do to be of service. Nigel@meinkhelp.com or Nigel Franklin Way on Instagram. Thank you for your mental energy. Thank you for listening. And until we meet again in this space, take good care.